This is The First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the first century. Episode 5. The Death of Herod the Great. In about the year 4 BCE, with the sons of Mariamne out of the picture, Antipater II was the sole heir to Herod the Great. But that did not last long, as he, like his half-brothers Aristobulus and Alexander, was tried on charges of treason, of attempting to murder his father, Herod the Great. The trial before the Roman governor of Syria, Varus, returned a guilty verdict. The sentence was death, but because of his position as heir, such a sentence needed to be ratified by Rome. Herod then altered his will again and appointed as heir Antipas, his youngest son, born of Malthace the Samaritan. Rome endorsed the sentence of capital punishment, and Antipater II was executed forthwith. Augustus made a quip in Greek that he would rather be Herod's pig, Hus, than his son, Huios. After executing Antipater II, Herod changed his will again, not comfortable with having Antipas as sole heir. So in this latest version of the will, he divided his kingdom between Archelaus, Philip, and Antipas, with Archelaus being named an ethnarch, whereas Philip and Antipas were named tetrarchs. An ethnarch is the ruler of a people, where a tetrarch is the ruler of a fourth. An ethnic, in this case, is much more prominent than a tetrarch. But essentially, Archelaus would be king, ethnarch, over the whole kingdom, with Antipas and Philip as subordinate tetrarchs. But only 5 days after executing Antipater II, King Herod himself died. Herod's temperament formed a good foil decades later for the Gospel of Matthew, which says that Herod the Great massacred innocent toddlers, and that would have been the time that Jesus was born. Though Herod had a well-known reputation for cruelty, there's no evidence other than the Gospel of Matthew that Herod slaughtered these children. The important thing to know is that Matthew places the birth of Jesus prior to Herod's death, at which time Jesus would have been a toddler. So according to Matthew, Jesus would have been born about 6 or 7 BCE. Because Herod had recently amended his will naming Archelaus ethnarch, Archelaus assumed leadership, though he would not accept the kingship. He made a point of stating that the kingship was dependent on Caesar's ratification. With Herod dead, some of the people who held grudges against him now saw their chance to act out. For example, in an earlier altercation, Herod had allowed the Roman standard to be posted at the temple gate. Some Judeans, who saw that as an affront to their god, cut down the Roman standard from the temple gate. Herod did not take kindly to that act of aggression, and he had those people killed. Now that Herod was dead, other Judeans took the opportunity of the Passover of 4 BCE to protest that past action. Yet Archelaus was not going to be bullied, and so he sent his army to keep the peace, and in doing so, killed about 3,000 Judeans. With so many potential heirs and recent changes to the will, it really needed to be ratified by Caesar Augustus, which was standard practice at that time in any case. Malthace and her sons, Archelaus and Antipas, did not leave anything to chance, and therefore they decided to go to Rome to argue their case before Augustus himself. They wanted to make clear that Herod the Great had bequeathed to Augustus 10 million drachmas, as well as gold, silver, and costly garments to Livia the Empress as well as to others. They hoped that would help seal their case. In Rome, upon learning of Herod's death, Augustus sent his treasurer in Syria, an official by the name of Sabinus, to Caesarea Maritima to inspect the estate. But in Galilee, Herod's death meant a power vacuum, which Judas, son of a local bandit by the name of Ezekias, was ready to fill. Judas and his men attacked Sepphoris, the administrative center of Galilee, only about 4 miles from Nazareth. Judas took not only the city, but its treasury and weapons, becoming even more well-suited for a revolt. Varus besieged the town, captured the rebels, and crucified more than 2,000, and sold others into slavery. Sabinus arrived sometime after Passover and Archelaus' execution of the 3,000 Judeans, but prior to Pentecost. He was under orders to remain in Caesarea until Augustus had a chance to review the will and make decisions about it. The Roman governor of Syria, Varus, had encamped at Antioch. With his patience stretched thin, Sabinus went to Jerusalem before he was formally ordered to do so. He took possession of the palace and began to take a fiscal account of the kingdom. He wanted to take the citadels too, but Archelaus' men were loyal to him, even though he had already left for Rome. His men would not comply with the orders from Sabinus. When told that Sabinus wanted access to the citadels, they replied that they were keeping guard for the emperor. This reply infuriated Sabinus, who insisted that he was the one acting on behalf of the emperor. In Rome, Malthaeus, Archelaus, and Antipas were joined by many others, including the cunning Salome, Herod's worm-tongued sister. Each member of the party had much to gain and much to lose by the adjudication of Herod's will. But Judeans who were living in Rome also wanted their opinions to count, and 8,000 supported a delegation from Judea who called for an end to Herodian rule. While the matter of settling Herod's will was being determined by Augustus, Malthaeus became ill and died, but her efforts on behalf of her sons were successful. Herod's last will said that Archelaus would be king, ethnarch, over the whole kingdom, and Antipas and Philip as subordinate tetrarchs. Now, Augustus determined that the kingdom was to be split into 4 parts, or tetrarchies, and that none of the rulers would be subservient to any other. Herod Archelaus would rule Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. 16-year-old Antipas would rule Galilee and Perea, 2 incontiguous territories. Philip, the son of Herod the Great and his 5th wife Cleopatra of Jerusalem, and therefore half-brother to Archelaus and Antipas, Philip would rule the territories north and east of the river Jordan. Herod's sister Salome was given the cities of Jamnia, Azotus, and Phasaelis, and 500,000 pieces of coined silver. Augustus also was sure to give Salome a palace at Ascalon and an annual allowance of 60 talents. In this way, Augustus meant to break up the province so that no one ruler would gain authority over any other. Back in Judea, the pressure continued to rise until there was a revolt against Roman rule during the Feast of Pentecost. What resulted was a skirmish between Judean rioters and Roman soldiers, which resulted in a Roman sack of the temple and its treasury, including about 400 gold talents. Varus eventually arrived in Jerusalem to quell the rebellion. To ensure success, Varus called on Aretas of Nabatea for assistance. Aretas had come to his throne in about 9 BCE. He held deep-seated animosity toward Herod, and even though Herod was now dead, this call for assistance from the Romans would be Aretas' chance to exact his own revenge. Aretas was only too eager to assist, and he took the opportunity to burn and plunder villages in Judea. With Varus's own 4 legions and help from Aretas, he made short work of this Pentecost uprising, crucifying 2,000 Judean rebels. Sabinus then returned to Rome in a successful attempt to avoid any charges of sacrilege. In recognition of Aretas' role in suppressing the rebellion, Augustus named him King of Nabatea. Thus was the state of affairs as spring turned to summer in 4 BCE. When Antipas returned in about 3 BCE to claim his tetrarchy of Galilee and Perea, he began to restore order and rebuild what had been destroyed during the past revolt against Rome. For example, Judas, son of Hezekias, had seized weapons in Sepphoris before it was completely destroyed by Varus's forces assisted by Aretas, and the people of Sepphoris had been reduced to slavery. Antipas thus began rebuilding Sepphoris with a substantial fortification wall, a theater, elaborate waterworks, and he made it his residence, as it became the largest city in Galilee. Interestingly, Nazareth was only 4 miles south-southwest of Sepphoris, but the city is never mentioned in the New Testament. The following year in Rome, Julia's promiscuous ways caught up with her. Her stepmother, Livia, secured proof of her adulterous affairs and talked with Augustus, who was enraged. Under the law that Augustus himself had enacted, his daughter Julia was worthy of death. She was arrested for adultery and treason for conspiring against the emperor. The men with whom she had affairs were exiled and forced to commit suicide. Her husband Tiberius was still in Rhodes, so Augustus took it upon himself to write up a divorce decree in Tiberius's name. Tiberius learned of the divorce he supposedly initiated only later. He then requested a return to Rome, but Augustus would not accept it. He said that Tiberius should stay in Rhodes, since he decided to leave his family in Rome. It wasn't really even very critical that he return. Julia was convicted and sent into a 5-year exile on the island of Pondicherry, during which she was not allowed to see any man except those vetted and approved by Augustus. With Tiberius undergoing his self-imposed exile, and Augustus not encouraging or even allowing a return, in 1 BCE, Augustus empowered his grandson Gaius with the eastern provinces. Due to his young age, he was accompanied by experts, such as his tutor, Quirinius, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who had been a successful general in Germania, and an up-and-coming advisor by the name of Sejanus, whose father was prefect to the Praetorian Guard. At the time, Gaius was married to Livilla, the sister of Germanicus and Claudius. Gaius performed well and concluded a peace treaty with the king of Parthia on an island in the Euphrates River. On the Greek island of Rhodes, Tiberius consulted with various astrologers, and he had a way of dealing with those he considered frauds. Tiberius's home was built high on the rocks, and he would take one of his strongest but illiterate freedmen on a walk with him, and the most recent astrologer he was consulting. The freedman would walk ahead of the other two as they chatted about horoscopes and the like. On the way back home, along craggy paths, Tiberius would lead the way with the freedman straggling behind the one being tested. If Tiberius was not satisfied with the answers, or considered the astrologer to be a fraud, he would signal to his freedman, who would hurl the man into the sea below, leaving no evidence of the execution. Once, a Greek-Egyptian literary scholar, philosopher, and astrologer by the name of Thrasyllus predicted that Tiberius would be recalled to Rome and succeed Augustus. Tiberius was intrigued by the idea and invited him on a walk with his freedman along the cliffs, as he had done with the other astrologers. Tiberius asked him about his own horoscope and the character of the particular day and year of this very walk. Thrasyllus paused and then began to tremble. He surveyed the position of the stars as he was gripped with terror. He said to Tiberius that he was facing a fatal crisis. Tiberius embraced him and congratulated him on foreseeing the danger. He then was convinced that he was quite safe. From that time on, Tiberius spent more time with Thrasyllus, learning about astrology and Stoicism. Next time, we'll learn about the tragic deaths of Lucius and Gaius, heirs to Augustus, and additional revolts in Judea.